with the UFC and Francis Ngannou parting ways, UFC had a vacancy in their heavyweight division. On March 4th at UFC 285, Jon Jones filled that vacancy and became the undisputed heavyweight champion when he submitted Ciryl Gane. Jones became the 8th fighter in UFC history to hold multiple belts in different weight classes. Champs, if you will. For many, this second title cemented Jones as the GOAT. All right, guys. So, what did you think about the way it all went down? There was I like it when the incumbent gives the belt to the new guy, but Jones is a GOAT, for crying out loud. It's not like we didn't know who he was. Reflect back to earlier this year on the fight, the achievement itself. Let's go to Mike for the first take here.
Yeah, I mean, it ducktails perfectly from our last topic, right? Like, this was an amazing moment, as we see here for Jon, amazing performance and everything. How much more special would it have been if he had done that to Francis Ngannou? Maybe not winning the same manner, but if he had beat him in that fight to become the heavyweight champion, it would have just unblurred a lot of lines. But regardless of who it is and how it went down, did this solidify him as the GOAT, which you kind of said there? It did for me. I mean, we did our top 30 fighters in UFC history this year with kind of the 30th anniversary. I know Jon Jones didn't make it number one in our kind of master list for the whole staff, but he was number one on my list and the person that I voted for. And this performance had a lot to do with it. George St. Pierre probably would have been number one if it was not for this. So, it left something to be desired. Obviously, it was a really quick fight. Jon went in there and simply dominated. It was a little disappointing on Gane's side that he wasn't able to put up more resistance. And I think kind of the people who maybe had some doubts about his grappling and stuff like that after the Francis Ngannou fight, this was like their worst case scenario for them. And he admits he made some rookie mistakes in there. So that kind of is what it is, but you can't take anything away from Jon for that, right? Like, he went in there, applied the techniques and got the finish, and was pretty flawless in capturing that title. So this was a legacy enhancer for sure. You just wonder, where does it go from here? I'm sure we'll get into all that with Jon Jones, but on the night, this was a special thing. We hadn't seen Jon fight in 3 years, I think it was at that point. So yeah, it was anytime you get to see this guy fight, it's pretty damn meaningful. And for him to do it on the stage with that performance is definitely kind of one of the high points of the year. And having Jon Jones back in the fold has changed a lot. I think we'd be having a different conversation right now about kind of where the future goes. Maybe he's retired at this point if he doesn't pull out of that fight with an injury and ends up fighting Stipe Miocic in November. So again, a lot of what ifs and all that kind of stuff with Jon Jones. But if you're talking about that night alone, it was definitely a significant one, and one that's going to be a defining point in Jones's legacy whenever he wraps up his career.
Mm-hmm. Nolan, let's go back to March 4th, UFC 285. What were your thoughts, man? It all went down so quickly. Pretty historical, maybe almost too quick. But what were your thoughts? And then, of course, let me get something else from you as well. Secondary, Jones versus Miocic was supposed to take place later in the year. It's been rescheduled for probably the second half of 2024. How are you feeling about that going forward? But let's go back to March 1st of this year and this win.
Yeah, it was special, man. For me, it was one of those MMA moments where there's certain things, and I think I've said it to you guys working with you every day, where you get really sick of hearing about so-and-so coming back, right? Like, I feel like that way with Connor now, where it's like, he's coming back. No, he's not. Yes, he is. He's in the pool. He's out. He's not. Like, I just, my brain, sometimes it just stops caring, right? And so for Jon, I feel like that had gone on for so long that he was kind of pushed out of my consciousness a bit. But when that fight week came, and it was time for him to step back in there, to me, man, it was a pretty special moment for him to go in there against a guy that I know now, looking back on it, it's easy to say, oh, Ciryl put on a poor performance and he should have worked on his grappling, and all it was a takedown and a kind of a weirdly angled guillotine choke. But going into that fight, I think, and even since that fight, I think Ciryl Gane is a pretty legitimate test. And for Jon to just go in there and essentially make him look like, a layup sort of fight, like me trying to tell my friends that are casuals about this fight that no, like that guy's actually one of the top heavyweights in the world. This isn't just some sort of setup fight. It was hard for them to believe. So good on Jon Jones. Like Mike said, he solidified himself as my GOAT as well. I think he was probably already the GOAT to me going into that fight. I know we could go on and on for hours about that, as we did with our our rankings show that we did. But to answer your second question, going forward, kind of spinning it forward, Jon versus Stipe, I'm not very like overly excited about it. I do understand the aspect of it that to kind of go back on that fight would screw Stipe to a certain degree. It's not Stipe that pulled out of that fight, right? It's not his fault. So I understand from the UFC's perspective. I understand from a fighter treatment perspective that they want to make that fight. And to be honest with you, man, we know how these things work. I don't think any of us sit here and pretend that we think that the sort of matchmaking that goes on in the sport is 1,000% objective and merit based, right? Like there will be more people that I think that will sign up to watch because we got all these all the casual fans coming in that know Jon, they know Stipe. That would be a fight that would sell more. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm underselling the power of Tom Aspinall, who could very well be the best heavyweight in the world. And that's the fight that interests me the most, but I also understand why they're going in a different direction, if that makes sense.
Goes, I do the watch-alongs every month here on MMA Junkie with you. I know you were blown away from you by his performance, and I know where you ranked him in the greatest on our list of the 30 greatest fighters in UFC history. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Let me ask you something. Jones has a serious injury. He did take the bull by the horns, got surgery immediately, but still, he's older. He's got a lot of wear and tear. What if he just were to retire? I mean, we've seen crazy things during our run. How would you feel about this? Is this maybe what the UFC would need to just start moving forward and put the whole Ngannou and Jones and all that saga behind him?
Yeah, I mean, I think his life is always more fun when he's an option, right? But I'm kind of with Nolan when we were sitting there waiting for him to bulk up and all that. It was just kind of that feeling of just tell me when you're ready to go and we'll all get excited again. And when he finally did come back, you do feel a different energy when a guy like Jon Jones does fight. It is a big deal. He's one of the guys you want to say you were there to watch him fight live. So to see him go away, it would sting, but it doesn't affect my pocketbook. I mean, I think that's where it affects the UFC is the pocketbook, but it wouldn't. As a fan watching it, maybe I would tell you Khabib going away probably stung me a little bit more. I think there were more matchups that I think I would have liked to see happen moving forward. But with Jon Jones, maybe it's that feeling that we still don't know. We still have like a few questions about him because he made such short work of Ciryl Gane. We want to know what would happen if a heavyweight Jon Jones went into the later rounds. If he fought some of these other names, there's always that whole Francis Ngannou thing, right? Man, what if? There's so many questions out there that I think it would sting a little bit, but I think Mike said it earlier in the show, like the UFC just moves on. Some of these big, massive stars that have retired, UFC still cleaning house money-wise. So it'd be sad, but it wouldn't be the end of the world, I think.
Mike, I know you got a lot of stats on your head, so let me throw something at you real quick. He's the greatest light heavyweight of all time. I know he's your GOAT of all time, meaning just the greatest, bar none, any weight class. But what about just isolating the heavyweight division? What would he need to do to become the greatest heavyweight of all time, in your opinion, if he were to stick around and give us a few more fights?
Yeah, I mean, beat I guess Stipe Miocic, beat Tom Aspinall, and then maybe like one more after that, two more, I guess, depending on who would like stand out from the bunch is the logical person. But yeah, like we've talked about this kind of on the history of shows, and what seems to like establish the greatness of these champions is did they defeat like the multiple eras of fighters, right? Like he could defeat someone like Stipe, who came up kind of with him, kind of before him, however you want to call it. Someone like Ciryl Gane, who is, I'd say, not like middling tier, and then Tom Aspinall, who's came charging up like way behind him in terms of like a different era. So if he can get through those various layers in another division, because he did that multiple times over at light heavyweight, I don't think he needs the 8 title defenses or whatever he got in that weight class 9. But a couple here would probably do it. It's hard to compare. Like the Stipe thing is more just for the resume as opposed to like the quality of the win at this point, just given where he's at age-wise and record-wise and all that stuff and layoff-wise. But that would be good if you're kind of just looking at the whole resume. And I think he knows that and how you assess that. And I think he knows how people in MMA just maybe sometimes look at it on paper and assess that way. But yeah, a couple wins, I think, does it. 2 title defenses, maybe 3. If he can break that record, that would obviously be huge for him as well. But I'm hard-pressed to think we might get 4 more Jon Jones fights.
The record is 4 by Stipe Miocic, and then of course you got the wild card that's Fedor Emelianenko for some hardcores. But yeah, if he beats Miocic along the way, he may not need to reach 4, so that would be the trade-off there. But man, I'd love to see it. Hopefully he gets healthy and we see something in 2024 from Jon Bones Jones, something with Aspinall, something with Miocic, just anything, man. This heavyweight division, holy cow, it's been frustrating the last few years. But we